Good morning. My name is Roland Anglin. I'm the Dean of the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs. I want to thank you for attending this forum, Resetting the Table, Creating an Urban Equity Agenda. We have a full house today, over 500 people registered for today's forum, and whatever the yield, it's safe to say that there is great interest in this topic. This forum is the first in a series of 4 over the next year, aimed at exploring focused, intentional network governance that addresses some really wicked problems. I want to give credit to PolicyBridge and their report, Resetting the Table, for focusing on collective impact to possibly address Cleveland's equity challenges. We have worked with PolicyBridge on other projects and welcome the opportunity to collaborate on this important topic. Wicked problems deserve grand solutions, and collective impact is building a national, indeed an international track record of making inroads in addressing tough problems. Having been the leader of a backbone organization that serviced the Collective Impact Initiative in Newark, New Jersey, I can testify it's hard work. Measurable progress can be made if you can convince the right stakeholders to participate, resources are available to support the process, and stakeholders buy into the accountability measures. We look forward to exploring this topic with PolicyBridge and colleagues in different sectors. I want to stress that we have no one sector in mind. We believe network governance has broad applicability. Some preliminaries. We got word that Mayor Justin Bibb was called away and could not attend today's event. We certainly understand. Mayor Bibb truly wanted to participate, but the people's business will and should win out every time. The disappointment is less, given that the mayor has asked Bradford Davey, his chief of staff, to represent him. Brad is known to many of us and well respected for his depth of knowledge and analysis of various policies. We thank Brad for stepping in. Now I'm going to turn the proceedings over to Greg Brown, Executive Director of PolicyBridge. Greg is an accomplished administrator and policy professional who's led some great nonprofits and public sector organizations here in Cleveland. We at the college count ourselves fortunate in that Greg is one of our instructors, and given his ability to transfer professional experience into learning, he is well appreciated by our students. So Greg, the show is yours.
Well, thank you so much for that warm welcome, Dean Anglin. And good morning to all of you who are participating in this webinar. It is our pleasure to team up with the Levin College to offer this opportunity for us to think about a couple of different things. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I'm going to actually move towards There we go. We want to move towards trying to make sure that we are able to begin to understand a couple of different things. First of all, why should we think about an urban equity agenda? And secondarily, how by utilizing the idea of collective impact, can we implement and operationalize the ideas and issues that confront us and the level of complexity that we will have to encounter to really improve conditions for everybody in our community? So when we start out, we ask the question, why an urban agenda? And we have to go back to the genesis of PolicyBridge. When PolicyBridge was conceived, it was conceived to address issues negatively affecting life in Cleveland's distressed neighborhoods, especially the African-American community. In our 17 years of research and advocacy, we have seen plenty of quality programs and initiatives undertaken to address a wide range of specific issues. Yet, even our most successful endeavors have not moved the needle in improving the overall quality of life and access to economic opportunities in Cleveland for low wealth neighborhoods. In fact, Cleveland is a city that consistently ranks among the poorest in the nation and is also singled out for undesirable realities ranging from Black infant mortality to the digital divide. So that begs a question, how can this be? Especially when we are a city of many hardworking and innovative community leaders and activists, an engaged business community, and with admirable philanthropic institutions and resources. Well, we considered several things and came up with three kind of overarching reasons why this urban agenda is important. First, we want to look at years of disinvestment, structural and institutional racism, and inequities that continue to loom large in Cleveland. Second, we must challenge and be deliberate when we address and be accountable in our efforts to bring about meaningful change. And third, we recognize that well-intentioned endeavors and single issue initiatives are not enough to combat systemic intersecting challenges. So to truly make a dent in such broad-based needs, we must unify our many individual efforts behind a single plan. And that plan is an urban agenda. An urban agenda is a call for coordinated and integrated planning, collective action, and accountability. The urban agenda framework identifies 6 focus areas: economic opportunity and mobility, neighborhoods and housing, community health and wellness, criminal and social justice, educational attainment and career launching, community mobilization, and stability. Each focus area has a full plate of priority issues, problems, and concerns. It is hoped that this framework is shared with corporate and philanthropic boards, shapes local elections, sparks community discussions, emboldens stakeholders, and drives this community to act with collective purpose for a better future for Cleveland and its people. An urban agenda advances the economic and social inclusion of Black and Brown people. It builds a vital, sustainable, healthy, and engaged community. It addresses conditions that have resulted in disinvestment in communities of color. It mitigates policies and practices that foster structural and institutional racism. An urban agenda is a blueprint that clarifies community priorities, codifies joint approaches for action, and unifies like-minded leaders from various backgrounds and disciplines to ensure successful implementation. An urban agenda is not a report or a policy brief. It also is not a new program or an initiative. So based on that level of engagement with our community partners and coming up with those actual areas in the framework, we have some overarching principles or assertions that lead to recommendations that we think are important. A central assertion that cities and communities must prioritize their needs, outline and communicate solutions, work with and through policymakers to initiate broad-based population level change. Another foundational principle is that siloed efforts cannot bring about the broad scale transformation needed in Cleveland. The challenge for Cleveland neighborhoods is macro, but our solutions tend to be micro. And while acknowledging and valuing the substantial efforts and resources expended, we encourage the following recommendations. Adopt community-level accountability measures. Encourage inclusion, stakeholder alignment. Seek extensive community input and voice. Acknowledge intersectionality. Sequence community change efforts. Reimagine philanthropy as a driving force behind this urban agenda, and dismantle structural and institutional racism. So now that we've laid out an approach, how should we think about implementation? Well, network systems, commonly known as collective impact, is how we can operationalize our urban agenda. I'd like to take a few short minutes and play a video for you that will give you an overview of collective impact and why we think this is a medium that could be effective as we move forward with implementation of an urban agenda.
The number and complexity of challenges facing our world can be overwhelming. When individual organizations attempt to tackle the most daunting problems, success stories are all too rare. Many innovative approaches have been tried, too few have worked. However, when organizations work together under the right conditions, they can accomplish great things. One particularly effective means of collaboration is collective impact. Using the collective impact approach, a number of complex social challenges have been addressed and some remarkable results have been achieved. Youth incarcerations dropped by 45% in just 3 years, with no change in public safety, improving the lives of thousands of youths. 6,000 public housing residents were placed in new jobs during the recession. More than 1,000 acres were restored and over 280 million pounds of pollution voluntarily reduced to conserve and restore a river. Organizations utilizing a collective impact approach do the following: agree to a common goal, agree to track progress in the same way, which allows for continuous improvement, do what each does best while identifying new ways to work together, have consistent communication, and finally, have skilled and dedicated resources to support ongoing efforts. The world's toughest challenges aren't going away. In fact, many experts predict they will continue to grow in both number and complexity. Solving these problems requires a range of expertise from a number of diverse organizations. Collective impact is a proven approach, helping organizations work together to move mountains.
So when we think about this idea of collective impact, we come to this idea of the fact that it's a structured form of collaboration that embraces continuous improvement and rigorous data to drive transformative social change. And as the video said, there are 5 essential conditions that really have to be put in place to ensure that collective impact can be and will be successful. The first condition is a common agenda, and that's represented by all participants having a shared vision for change. The next is shared measurement, where there is agreement on the ways success will be measured and reported. Another essential condition is mutually reinforcing activities, where engagement of a diverse set of stakeholders is very important. Then we move to another essential condition, which is continuous communication, represented by frequent and structured open communication across the many players. And last, but certainly not least, is the need for backbone support, which is ongoing support by independent funded staff dedicated to the initiative. These conditions will help to ensure the success of a collective impact approach. But there are also principles of practice that undergird and support the collective impact approach. And these are: design and implement the initiative with a priority placed on equity. Include community members in the collaboration. Recruit and co-create with cross-sector partners. Use data to continuously learn, adapt, and improve. Cultivate leaders with unique system leadership skills. Focus on programs and system strategies. And build a culture that fosters relationships, trust, and respect across participants. And last, but certainly not least, you must customize for local context. I really want to thank you all for allowing me to spend a few minutes trying to create a context for our panel discussion today, focused on the urban agenda document that we produced in November, and the idea of using a collective impact approach to foster the implementation of that urban agenda. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our panel today, a person who, for many of you, is someone who is very recognizable. He is Randall Mcshepherd, and Randy is the board chair of PolicyBridge and also one of the 3 co-founders of PolicyBridge. Randy is also Vice President of Public Affairs and Chief Talent Officer for RPM International. He has a long history of being engaged in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors of our community, where he has an extensive track record of demonstrated success, but also engagement of different and diverse people to bring about solutions. It is my pleasure to introduce Randy Mcshepherd.
Well, thank you, Greg. And there may be a salary increase on the way after all those wonderful comments. Good morning, everyone. So thrilled to see so many of you participating in today's forum. I want to thank Greg, first of all, for that wonderful overview of both the PolicyBridge Urban Agenda document, as well as the collective impact model. And thank you, Dean Anglin, for those opening comments. I'd also, again, like to thank all of you in the audience today for lending your time to be with us this morning for what we think is a very important community discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know and appreciate the fact that there are many great things happening in our city, and there clearly are some great examples of high-level community cooperation. We at PolicyBridge contend, however, that if more of our leaders and organizations could come together in coordinated fashion, that we would have a much better chance of addressing the systemic issues that hinder equity for all. So we have reached the panel discussion portion of our program, and I am excited to introduce our 3 panelists, each of whom have extensive experience with collective cross-sector initiatives. Before I start those introductions, I do want to say to the audience that as you listen to the comments and various things shared by the panelists, please share your questions using the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can. So fasten your seatbelt, and we will get this show on the road. With introductions, I'd like to start out by restating that while it's unfortunate that the mayor couldn't be here, as the dean said, he's a very busy man. I know the speed and the pace that some things come at you when you're holding such august positions. And we couldn't be more thrilled that if the mayor couldn't be with us, that his right-hand man could be. And that is Mr. Bradford Davey, who serves as the Chief Strategy Officer and Senior Advisor to Mayor Bibb. His role includes helping Mayor Bibb fulfill his campaign promises regarding racial equity, the development of the West Side Market, and advancing arts and culture throughout the city. Mr. Davey has been an international project manager for Camcode Global, a research and policy analyst for the Center for Community Solutions, and most recently served as the Director of Regional Engagement for the Fund for Our Economic Future. And while at the Fund for Economic Future, Mr. Davey was actually central in developing Opportunity CLE, which was a project dedicated to identifying and promoting social enterprises within federally classified opportunity zones that prioritize social good as an outcome of successful businesses. Mr. Davey shares that he is dedicated to economic equity, particularly for marginalized residents of Cleveland. And I would be remiss if I didn't also add that he is a proud graduate, as I am, of this august Levin College of Urban Affairs. So welcome, Mr. Davey. Thanks so much for being here. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Baiju Shaw, who is the president and CEO of the Greater Cleveland Partnership, the region's leading economic development organization with over 12,000 members, the largest metropolitan chamber of commerce in the nation. He's guided by a board of corporate and entrepreneurial CEOs. The organization focuses on accelerating growth and prosperity through strategic initiatives, business services, real estate, and advocacy. Prior to GCP, Mr. Shaw served as the Senior Fellow for Innovation at the Cleveland Foundation. He worked, amongst other things, centering on catalyzing economic growth initiatives, such as leading the Cleveland Innovation Project, which we might talk a little bit about. Previous to that, Shaw was the CEO of Biomotive and a co-leader of the Harrington Project for Discovery and Development, a national drug development initiative. During his tenure, the company established strategic partnerships with the likes of Bristol Myers Squibb, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson. Prior to that, he was CEO and co-founder of BioEnterprise, which is when I think I first met Baiju. Mr. Shaw is a director of Athersys and is also a senior advisor to Faster Cures, a center of the Millikan Institute. He is also a trustee of Destination Cleveland, Global Cleveland, Team Neo, Ohio Excels, and the Ohio Business Roundtable. And he received a JD from Harvard Law School and a BA from Yale University. And last but certainly not least, thank you for joining us, Mr. Shaw, I'm sorry. Thank you, finally, we would love to introduce my good friend, India Pierce-Lee. India Pierce-Lee is a senior vice president of program at the Cleveland Foundation. She leads the foundation's grant-making team, working with the board, the staff, and community leaders to define Greater Cleveland's critical needs and leverages resources to help to meet those needs. Pierce-Lee joined the foundation in 2006 as the program director for neighborhoods, housing, and community development. She worked with the Cleveland's community development corporations and oversaw things like the Greater University Circle Initiative, which is a multi-institutional revitalization partnership, which includes Case Western Reserve University, Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, and the City of Cleveland. Prior to joining the Cleveland Foundation, Pierce-Lee served as Senior Vice President of Programs at Neighborhood Progress Incorporated. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Management from Cleveland's Dyke College and is a graduate of the Lewis Stokes Fellowship in Community Development from the Mandel School of Applied Social Services at Case Western Reserve University, where she obtained a Master of Science in Social Administration. In 2009, if that's not enough, Pierce-Lee completed the prestigious Loeb Fellowship from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University, where she studied neighborhood revitalization with a special interest in sustainability. She completed a Master of Art in Psychology, specializing in diversity management at Cleveland State University in May of 2017. So what I like to say to India is that she has more degrees than a thermometer. So India, it's so nice to have you with us. It's so nice to have all of you with us as panelists. We're going to get this show on the road, and as mom taught me, ladies first. So India, I'd like you to spend a few minutes just sort of reacting to what you heard from Mr. Brown's presentation. What I love about this panel, as I said in my opening comments, is that each of you have had your fair share of these cross-sector, large, unwieldy, in some cases, partnerships. Bradford with the Fund for Economic Future, I spent some years working on that initiative, and I know firsthand it's a large, convoluted, in some cases, 18-county initiative with all sorts of players. The Cleveland Innovation Project, I'm sure Beju had some sleepless nights bringing those various entities together and actually pulling them through to the finish line with some pretty exciting outcomes. And India, we could go on and on with the various initiatives, but Greater University Circle Initiative is a pretty impressive one because you have some of our largest institutions coming together addressing some critical needs. So India, did you just react to what Mr. Brown's presentation sort of hinted on as it relates to the collective impact model, but then also what you might have gleaned from the Resetting the Table report, and just what thoughts came to mind as you listened to that presentation?
Well, thank you, Randy, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. When I read the report, I mean, it was a no-brainer. I mean, we've been talking about this for decades, the information that was presented. And I think that it sets the table for where we are today. I'm enthusiastically optimistic that with the leadership changes that are taking place, the generational changes that are taking place today, that we can figure this out. I think that it lays a blueprint for where this city, county, region needs to go. I think that we all know the issues of trying to get there. We've all worked on various initiatives, projects, and as you said, we have not made the dent in all the areas that we need to change the systemic issues that face our city. I think that we have this opportunity to use not only this report, but the collective knowledge from not only the people on this panel, but all those working in the various sectors. And it starts at the top, right? We need government, we need the business community. Definitely the corporate sector has to support this, philanthropy and the nonprofit sector. But most importantly, we need to listen to the people on the ground that have the lived experiences that we begin to look at all these issues. And I think, unfortunately, it took two crises to get us where we are today. But I think it also has put us in the position to be able to react and create the opportunities for this city. We'll get into some of this later, but we've had many cross-sector collaborations. I've worked on a lot that you talked about, right? Greater University Circle, the Cleveland Innovation Project, the Innovation District. But the question I have, I guess, for the community is, how do we get past the past? We want to be a big time city, but we have a small town mentality sometimes when it comes to making the kind of changes. We're in a great position now with data collection and how we're doing that in a different way, to analyze it so it's not just numbers on the paper, but how are we impacting the people that we are all put in our positions to serve? And so I thank you for the report. And if people haven't read it, I think it lays out a very robust agenda. And I challenge us to figure out, with the new administration in place, how do we work together collectively to move this agenda around all those areas? I mean, when I look at the foundation, we are working on all the focus areas that you mentioned in the report. And it's daunting, it's challenging. I look at that every day. Sometimes it's depressing. And then there's those glimmer of hopes where you hear the stories of those that we have served and helped, but it's not enough. We got to have viable services, a clean city, great education, creating the type of jobs that give people livable wages. And then at the end of the day, working together and ensuring that we tackle the structural and institutional racism that have persisted for decades and decades and decades. And it can't be a check of the box. It starts with the top leadership, with our boards, our CEOs, senior management. It can't be something that people say, yes, we're doing it. We have to work at it. It's not a silver bullet, but we have to put in the time and effort to make the changes necessary.
Excellent comments. Thank you so much. There's so much in what you just said, India. Hopefully that will springboard a robust discussion. One of the things you talked about was starting with government. Mr. Davey, you are the Chief Strategy Officer or Chief of Strategy and a Senior Advisor to the Mayor. What's your reaction to the report and to collective impact as a potential approach, and any other thoughts you'd like to share?
First, good morning. I'd like to just thank the Levin College of Urban Affairs, PolicyBridge, my friends, my colleagues from the Cleveland Foundation and the Greater Cleveland Partnership. I do recognize that many folks were expecting to hear from our leader, our 58th mayor, Mayor Justin Bibb. He sincerely apologizes for his inability to join today. And I also recognize that this might feel a little bit like buying tickets to a Lakers game only to find out LeBron is injured. I did talk to the dean. We are not giving refunds. So thanks for allowing me to be a part of the conversation today. What an amazing presentation. I think, if I were to highlight one thing from Mr. Brown's comments, it would be the blueprint that clarifies community priorities, really unifies and communicates and codifies those ideas. And the reason that's such a salient point for me is because we're about 50 days in to a municipal transition, the first transition we've seen in this city in 16 years. And that transition really started in the wee hours of the morning of November 2nd, where we said we need to democratize our priorities as a community and codify those in a way that really sets forward our agenda for the next 4 years. And so as a transition team, we huddled about 75 local leaders, listened to over 500 stakeholders, and compiled a report that really set out the 6 or 7 key priority areas, our urban agenda, if you will, on how we would think about approaching not only our first 100 days, but our first term, right? And so we went one step further, and what we said was we need to put those in a public, front-facing document, right, that folks can hold us accountable to, and we can hold ourselves accountable for, right? And that's why if you visit mayor.cleveland.gov, you'll see our 100-day tracker and our transition report. And I say that not to promote or drive clicks to the new website, although the new website is very good. I say it because communication and codification of plans and priorities are so important, not just to communicate our values, but to make sure that our partners who are looking to leverage their assets and leverage the things that they're doing understand the direction that we're trying to go. And so, really, really appreciate the urban agenda, really appreciate the collective impact model. And I would say from the municipal side, we are really committed.
Thank you, Bradford. And you should promote activity and clicks so that all of our citizens can read and better understand those 100-day priorities and those many items that you all have planned to do to move our city forward. Can you repeat the link for that?
Absolutely. It's mayor.cleveland.gov, new mayor's landing page. So you'll see the ability to download a transition port. And you'll also be able to see our 100-day tracker, where we list about 85 items that we're hoping to complete in the first 100 days. And what we do is we update those as they're in progress and then as they're completed.
That's outstanding. Well, I would encourage all of you out there to take a look at that and to be ready and willing to help in any way that you can. We will now transition to the business community. India referenced the importance of business being a critical part of the solution, and we know that that's something that our corporations care a lot about and are more than willing to step up to do their part. Beju, it's your turn, sir, to react to the report as well as collective impact as a model, and of course, even to your fellow panelists. What are your thoughts?
Great. Thank you, Randy. And thank you to the Levin College and to PolicyBridge for inviting me to join this important conversation this morning with friends and colleagues, and Bradford and India as well. So let me start by just framing a little bit for the audience the role of the Greater Cleveland Partnership. I think business chambers are not often well understood organizations. There's a whole spectrum in terms of what their interests are. In the case of the Greater Cleveland Partnership, the reason that the chamber exists is really with a focus on driving growth and prosperity for the community broadly. It's not about any individual business interest, it's really about the community's interest. That's why not only the large organizations, but the entrepreneurs that are a part of our organization, that's why they sit at our committees, sit at our tables, and shape a platform for how we can move forward to really drive growth and prosperity, as Randy shared in his opening comments, throughout Greater Cleveland. Now, recently, we too released a plan, a vision for the region to once again become one of the great regions on the Great Lakes. And as we released that vision, what we said is foundational to the success of realizing that vision is an all-in mindset, spirit, and values. A set of values that we've codified that in many ways could be described as the values that underpin collective action. So in terms of a reaction to what Greg shared earlier, we strongly believe in collective action is the only way forward to realizing not only our vision, but also the urban agenda that PolicyBridge has outlined. If you take a look at our plan, there are 5 intersecting elements, much like the elements of the PolicyBridge urban agenda. And I'll talk a little bit about how our plan and the urban agenda connect. For us, it starts with dynamic businesses that are constantly innovating and driving productivity. But for those businesses to succeed, they need access to abundant talent at all skill levels for the organization. And for talent to be in abundance, our third priority is we must be inclusive and ensure that we have diversity at all levels of our organization to make sure that our entire community is participating in this in the growth and success of our region. The fourth priority for us is all around ensuring we have an appealing community, because as individuals become skilled, as they participate in various growth sectors, they can live and work anywhere, especially in a technologically connected world. We want them to remain in the Greater Cleveland region. The only way we get there is we actually have to have an appealing community that looks appealing to, in particular, the next 2 generations. And then finally, the fifth priority for us is all around business confidence. Now, against each of these priorities, there's a direct connection back in many ways to the urban agenda that the PolicyBridge has outlined in their report. I look at it by the colors, Greg, that you outlined in your slides. So certainly it starts with economic opportunity and inclusive economic opportunity. We're focused there again on diversity at all levels. That includes not only talent development and talent hiring and reducing barriers to participation, but it's also about scaling ownership and diversifying ownership and leadership all the way through our business and civic community. As India said, it starts at the tops of our organizations. It has to go throughout. Your blue pillar is all about education. We're very focused on that as well from the business community's perspective, starting with addressing the digital divide, ensuring that we not only close it, we end the digital divide so that everyone in our community can really use technology for not only learning, but also earning and living. But then it broadens into programs that are connected to our secondary schools and ensuring that we have broad career exposure so that as individuals are going through secondary education, they have awareness as to what the possibilities are that are out there in the world. Many people, when they're going through high school, myself included, when I went through high school, they know nothing about the world of work. At most, what happens in the school and sort of what your parents are up to. And that's kind of it. So having that career exposure certainly can open horizons for individuals. And that's a program we're committed to in partnership with the Cleveland Foundation and many others, and was recently launched with CMSD. But it goes beyond that to training programs, as you've outlined, Greg, in your report, about sector partnerships, where we work again with in a collective action way with a number of organizations in the IT sector and healthcare and manufacturing and recently in hospitality. And then it continues on to higher education. On your yellow segment, neighborhoods and housing, that's another area where the business community is heavily engaged, not just in promoting affordable housing and supporting real estate development, but also in critical community assets, supporting the financing of the expansion of the food bank, Providence House, the Pivot Center, just to name a few examples. So we see a lot of intersections in terms of the urban agenda as outlined by PolicyBridge with the plan and vision that we've just outlined called the all-in plan for a great region on a great lake. But to get there, we recognize that we can't do this alone. We have to be at the table, as India noted, but we have to do this with partners, partners throughout the public sector, partners throughout the philanthropic sector, and that it really is collective action that's required to achieve the outcomes that are required. Now, collective action, we talked about the all-in mindset, spirit, and values that we're promoting, but it does require, as you pointed out, Greg, metrics and milestones. Right? It's not enough to talk about this. We actually have to measure it. We have to measure it with regularity. And we have to have these types of conversations to discuss every year, how are we doing? What's working, what's not working? How do we change so that we stay on trajectory to the outcomes that ultimately impact the individuals that we're trying to impact throughout our community? And that takes all-in accountability. It's not just all-in execution, but it's all-in accountability towards those outcomes. So we are very excited about what you've laid forward and looking forward as a business community to being a partner in bringing the outcomes to realization.
Outstanding. Thank you very much for that, Beju. Well stated, and I certainly agree with your comments. Just a little bit about collective impact before we move into other questions. Based on your collective understanding of what collective impact is and how the model works, are there immediate strengths or weaknesses that come to mind with regard to that approach as you think about your respective sectors that you represent, business, government, and philanthropy? And I'll start with Bradford.
Sure. Good news is that we have committed partners, right? Demonstrated on this call. I think we have strong backbone support, and we have a real litany of mutually reinforcing activities, right? And so if we walk through Greg's slide, some of the essential conditions are met. Here's where I'm not sure that we're the strongest, and Beju alluded to it. It is really holding ourselves accountable to metrics, right? It is a deep and unabiding commitment to saying what we are trying to accomplish is X, and here's what it looks like. And I think it's hard to get to that level of granularity, especially with so many stakeholders, right? I think that's really where the challenge lies. And so how do we start to lay down really, really specific goals, plant a flag and go there, right? We should be saying Cleveland is going to be the Black tech. That will take X, Y, and Z. And to get there, and how we'll know we get there, is by these measures. Well, I think that there are commitments around bold statements like that. Sometimes there's some difficulty getting to the specificity on the metrics that will mean success. And I also think that one of the challenges with any sort of collective impact, which is on this macro level, right, this audacious macro level, is an acceptance, at least from the municipal side, and the government side, that there are limitations, that there's limited resources. I say this in the midst of budget hearings, right? Week 2 of budget hearings. What we know is that there's limited resources, there's limited time, there's limited capacity. Beju will tell you that there's limitations on talent. India will tell you that there's limitations on resources. There are limitations, and so we do have to make some choices. and grappling and reckoning with the idea that some things may not be priority number one is really, really difficult. So I'm a person who gets a lot of emails about snow. All my colleagues, we get a lot of emails about snow. Y'all, we can say right now, right here, that we are going to be the best city, the best winter city in America. But to be the best winter city in America, we will have to make some choices that mean we may not be the best in something else. And so, you know, these are questions that we have to grapple with every day, and these are the pros and cons of any collective impact model. Thanks.
Outstanding, outstanding, and I'm so happy the sun is shining today, Bradford. At least you don't have to take a call today about
Good
snow.
Me too.
India, please respond with your thoughts.
I agree that we have to, with the collective impact, there's an opportunity to figure out what the metrics are in the data. And we've been doing a lot more of that in the last couple of years. But we also have to know that we're going to have to sacrifice in certain areas in order to have the kind of impact we want to have. And so how do we leverage the resources and limited resources we have across all of our different sectors, right? We have different things, our missions are different, we have to meet those, but how do we collectively come together and point to the direction we want to go and set those, right? We want to be actionable. We want some short-term, medium-term, but long-term, you know, where do we see and how do we plan for success for this city? Where do we see Cleveland in the next 20 to 30 years? And how do we, you know, put the talent in place, put the leadership in place that even when we rotate out, that agenda stays in place to become the city we want to become. And I think we, again, have the opportunity to do that, but it's going to be rolling up the sleeves, giving up the egos, giving up some power, and really doing the hard work to say, this is our direction. But I think it can be done. We've seen it in other cities.
I totally agree with that. Thank you. Your turn, Beju. What do you think?
So, you know, I would say a couple of reflections maybe. I don't know who the backbone organization is that's going to own this agenda, whether it's PolicyBridge or another organization. We need that. You know, I think we've got a lot of, as Bradford said, we've got some great backbone organizations, but someone has to own it, right? And then that table needs to be created that enables the intersections with all the other sectors with regularity and against both short and medium term metrics. India is talked about short, medium, and long. I'm too impatient to think about long. So I really like short and medium and on an annual basis. And then we have to be honest about what did we actually achieve? What did we not achieve? We've done this through the Cleveland Innovation Project. We've got, yes, 10-year metrics, but we have 1-year metrics, and we'll be releasing those in a year, in a week, in terms of what did we achieve in 2021, where did we make the mark, where did we miss the mark, and where did we then set goals for 2022, you know, to continue us towards those long-term metrics. We need to do something very similar, I think, to really push this urban agenda forward. Something that I've seen maybe often in our community, maybe it's true in many communities, is there are many, many competing priorities, as Bradford noted. There's a lot of other things that organizations and the community needs focus on. I think what's exciting about the urban agenda is that it's cross-cutting. It brings together a lot of the intersections beyond just the things that I talked about in terms of intersections with the economic growth and prosperity, but it ties into health, it ties into community stability and other important elements. It's perhaps the right sort of cross-cutting agenda that then enables that to be the framework on how we actually work together, rather than watching us, you know, go from this panel discussion and then off to the next one and the next one and the next one. We have instead sort of a consistency of how we interact and a common agenda around which we're trying to move forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Beju. I appreciate the candor from all three of you about some of the challenges associated with this. And it brings me to my next question, which is, when you think about this idea of cross-sector collaboration, What actions do you think your respective sectors, be it government, business, or philanthropy, needs to take to establish buy-in and long-term commitment to this work? Each of your respective fields have to find this, important enough, as considered a priority to invest, not just for a couple of meetings, which we are guilty of in Northeast Ohio. We come together and we have a forum and then we all feel good and we go back to our respective corners. No, that can't be. We have to stay with this for the long term. And it is somewhat of a paradigm shift when you're challenging these sectors to sort of hang together over an extended period of time to ensure that this new line of coordination or cooperation actually works. So if you're listening to your peers, your members at GCP, Beju, the residents of Cleveland, Bradford, what do you think is going to be needed to establish that long-term buy-in by your respective sectors? And we'll start this time with India.
I think, I want to talk a little bit about the foundation. We have been on the last 2 years looking at a new strategic direction, but guided by our principles and belief in racial equity and inclusion. And so part of that is looking at how we, and again, we're just beginning this and going to test it in the community. How do we foster inclusive economic prosperity for our residents, which a lot of us are talking about across all of these sectors, right? So right there, we are all kind of on the same page, but figuring out how to get there. How do we create pathways for individuals that's going to change their trajectory and give them, the type of supports they need? And that, again, crosses all of our sectors. And then how do we build and share power? And that's a hard one to define, right? What do we mean about building and sharing power? When we talk about resident engagement, when we talk about their lived experience and putting the people at the table that are most impacted, and then shaping our strategies around the needs that they tell us that are important to them. So I think about it from that, and that again takes the kind of leadership that you need at every level. You have to have your board buy-in, you have to have the senior level management, CEO, but also the kind of training and education it takes and having the hard conversations that we have to move the needle. We've done a lot of this work, the Racial Equity Institute, the work at the YWCA and others. And now I think, again, how do we begin to implement, institute this in a way that we can have the kind of impact we're all looking for? And that's a starting point. We're already there.
Very, very good and very true. Bradford, on behalf of the citizens of this great city, how would you answer that question, sir?
There's three things, right? Be honest and ask and answer. In the room, I think oftentimes we think about 601 as this isolated microcosm that does work downtown, right? That can't be the case. It just simply can't be the case. The city of Cleveland, its leadership team, we need to be in the room having conversations with stakeholders and residents at every turn. Yeah. To other stakeholders, other backbone organizations, and say, you know what, that's not one of our superpowers. That's something that we might need a little bit of help with, or that's an important issue, but it's not the priority for us today. Or that's a great program that should be funded. Unfortunately, it's not where our priority funding is. We're going to need to help work with some other partners. And then ask and answer. Two of my colleagues that I do this with regularly, ask for help. If there is a function that the city of Cleveland can't carry out, that we can't do well, or that we need support around, we should be calling the Greater Cleveland Partnership. We should be calling the Cleveland Foundation. We should be calling Levin, right? I've already done it. We need more capacity. We need bright minds inside City Hall. Let's bring them in. India, we need more capacity to support our departments. Can we create a fellowship, right? Beju, we need some upskilling of some of our teams. Do you have subject matter experts who can come in and help us grow as a city? Ask and answer. I think in order for us to really lean into this collective impact model, we have to be honest and open about who we are, and continue to be in the room and engage in thoughtful and open ways.
Well stated. Thank you for that. Mr. Shaw, please share your thoughts, sir.
Sure. From the business community's perspective, again, this has been embedded, elements of this have been embedded now into our vision, our plan, our metrics, our milestones that we're striving for as the business community. So I think that that's critical in terms of establishing the buy-in, to answer your question, Randy, in terms of where we're at. And those priorities, those don't change. Those persist for us. And now it's a matter of measuring what success are we having against moving the outcomes. Now, that I don't want to say, that's been brought into by our board. Our board is 90 individuals. They represent, again, corporate and entrepreneurial leadership throughout our community and institutional leadership as well throughout our community. That's not all of the entire business community. So there's work to be done to broaden that buy-in beyond sort of what the Greater Cleveland Partnership Board of Directors has set forward in terms of its priorities. And that's work that we need to continue to undertake as an organization to demonstrate to those business leaders that there is great benefit to our community that also then has indirect benefit to them as business owners or residents of our community in pursuing these elements of our agenda.
Excellent. I think we're all on the same page, ladies and gentlemen. I guess I want to go back to a comment that India made, and India and I have been fighting this fight for decades. So we've scratched our head and hung our head about this. Having had the opportunity to operate in many different spheres, I would argue that it's not difficult to get a meeting called with businesses, the public sector, and certainly foundations. The fourth leg of the stool, the residents, the citizens, those that are most affected with that life experience that India alluded to earlier, oftentimes find themselves sort of fighting for an opportunity to be heard. And again, as I stated before, to be heard beyond the sort of traditional town hall forum, one and done, and then people sort of walk away and say, well, we've heard a few great comments from the residents, so now we have what we need to go into our boardroom and sort of have these larger scale discussions and strategy sessions. We sort of alluded to this in the PolicyBridge report, but I think I also hear it in India's and Bradford's and in your comments as well, Baiju, that we have to find a new way, I believe, to ensure that residents are heard and invited on an ongoing basis to continue to infuse that lived experience, to continue to talk about what they're seeing on the ground, what the daily life challenges are, so that we can all be smarter business leaders, public sector leaders and philanthropic leaders. And if you take your eyes off that population, it's easy to sort of miss. And I think that gets back to why although we've had many wins and many projects that have been deemed successful, the broader picture is that Cleveland is still at the bottom of too many of these lists. So any thoughts that any of you would have about how we can change that dynamic in terms of ensuring that on an ongoing basis, we're continuing to hear from residents? Any models that work, any approaches that work, any organizations that come to mind? Anything that you could share would be helpful. India, because I picked on you for bringing it up in the first place, I'll let you take a swing at that first.
Well, as I think about, again, different initiatives and things we're doing around the city collectively, I'll look at a micro strategy that I think is working. And this is the work of Midtown Cleveland, working with the Huff residents along the E66 corridor, where you have a youth council, a resident council, who are embedded in the planning for that area, and the work is being captured and part of the strategy. And with that, where Midtown has provided resources, but given the community opportunity with the LEOs listening and bringing the residents together in a way that not only are they at the table, but they are shaping the agenda for that area. And so as we think about, and for those that don't know what I'm talking about, there's Transportation for Livable Community Initiative along the East 66 from Euclid to Superior that the city is leading along with many partners. But it was the Youth Council that has really driven the process, learning about planning. So now you have youth from the community involved in that. You have residents that are involved in that, and the plan has been adopted by the city. This is how you change people's perception and giving people not only their value, but their voice being heard. And I can talk about other places, the master plan over in Clark Fulton, which is, huge. You got the purpose-built communities in Glenville and Wood Hill, and then CMHA, the work that they've done there with the Wood Hill Estates. So we have many examples where residents were at the forefront and are shaping the direction of their community.
Those are great examples, and I know they're all making an impact. Beju, what do you say about this?
So we strongly believe in the need to have that input as well. That example that India just outlined is something that the city, I'll give you another example, and this is again development related, but the city under the mayor's leadership has insisted that as we think about connecting downtown once again to the lakefront, restoring that waterfront, that's critical that we make sure that the process is inclusive broadly in our community, and that we are building a lakefront that is accessible for all of our residents throughout, not just the city of Cleveland, but greater Cleveland. The CDCs are great examples of organizations that can bring residents into the process, hear their voices, as is the public sector. There's a natural intersection point with the public sector, of course, not only through elections, but through councils, through wards, through many different structures that the public sector has in place and are familiar to residents. So we look forward to partnering with our both public and nonprofit partners to hear the voice of the residents.
Outstanding. Bradford, please give your perspective, sir.
So you would be remiss, you'd be sort of pressured to find a forum in which we didn't talk about the need for community engagement, right? We talk to engage residents ad nauseum to a point. What I don't hear a lot about are the types of questions we're asking when we talk to residents and community leaders. We asking challenging questions that might make us feel a little bit uncomfortable with the answers that we receive. Are we asking questions that will have a tangible impact? Will their responsive have a tangible impact on the product or the project that we're trying to advance? I think the next evolution of our civic ecosystem needs to focus a bit more on the type of engagement, the why, the what, and a little less on the need for engagement. We've all sort of stacked hands in this agreement that engagement needs to happen. What I don't think that we have shared alignment on, or we don't have the muscle memory of, is asking the type of challenging questions that will get us to new outcomes, and making sure that those tough answers are codified in a place that hold all of us as leaders accountable.
Well said, well said. I do have one last question, because we're starting to get some questions from the community that I certainly want to get to. Are there any examples of collective impact in Cleveland that any of you can think of that had equity at the center? And any of you can go if you have. India's turning her mic on here.
I think the most recent, I think the COVID Rapid Relief Fund is a great example, right? It wasn't planned, it was born out of crisis, but it brought together over 70 donors and funders together to really address needs immediately in the community. But the aftermath of that now has created a different understanding of how we work together, looking at how data is being collected, how you dissect that data, that we are reacting differently and how we respond to different things, and then setting a landscape, but again, with the equity agenda in mind and even collecting data around it, I think is one example of really, it was forced collective impact, but I think it was one of the best things to help us all begin to work together and understand each other better.
Absolutely. And much good work was done, and I think it helped all the participating entities to better understand how they can work together in the future, and that it doesn't have to be a crisis, right, to do these kinds of initiatives in the future. So that's a great example. Beju?
Yeah, so I'll use, I don't want to presume that equity is at the center, but I will say that diversity, inclusion, and equity has been threaded throughout the Cleveland Innovation Project. That project, which is really a regional strategy effort, in large part because of the Cleveland Foundation and the Fund for Economic Future, where Bradford was prior to taking his new role, insisted that we have inclusion, diversity, and equity threaded throughout the initiatives. And again, that there were measures against each and every one of the initiatives in terms of the outcomes that we're striving. So as you'll see next week, when we talk about the results from year one, there were targets set to ensure that whether it's around the talent programs or the capital investment going into companies, that the individuals that are being impacted or the executive leadership of these companies reflect our community for both Black and Hispanic population in particular, but also for gender diversity, which is an important form of inclusion and diversity in the tech sector, and a barrier that we need to continue to break down as well. So it's an example of where, because of largely I think advocacy from the Cleveland Foundation and the Fund for Economic Future, it was embraced by the other partners that these would be important values that would thread throughout this set of strategies, and that there would be measurements against that on an annual basis, that we would not feel successful if we were not achieving those measures in addition to other broader regional measures.
Thank you for that. Absolutely a lens that we probably hadn't looked through in previous initiatives in past years. So the fact that we're teeing that up and baking it into these larger efforts is notable and certainly commendable. Mr. Davey, please share your
defer to my friend India, who looks like she had a response.
Oh, did she have a response?
I just want to add one piece that we haven't talked about and we can talk about later: the role of media as we talk about this and how our city is perceived. I think that's one piece we haven't brought up. I just want to throw that out there.
Good point. Go ahead, Bradford.
Important point, India. Thank you. Yeah, I would mimic my colleagues. I think that those are examples of equity-focused collective. I would also say that LED, is another example of collective impact, where we see, the city of Cleveland, city council, the Cleveland Clinic is really stacking hands and putting in about $67 million of new commitments to eradicate lead, a crisis that affects about 1,000 children a year. And so we understand that where the majority of those cases are focused. And so I think it's a place where we're really beginning to see collective impact focused on equity and equitable outcomes.
Outstanding. Well, as the questions mount, I will make the transition to what we're receiving from our audience. A couple of quick ones I'll hit. Question for you, Bradford: is there a public copy of the stakeholders that were interviewed for the process?
Everything that's codified in the report is what our 75 committee members have put forward.
Okay, so there's not necessarily a list of all the people that were interviewed, but there is a list of who those 75 people are. Is that the transition committee essentially?
Yeah, pretty comprehensive list in there.
Okay, so thank you for that. Someone asked the question, there's two sort of related questions. How are we going to deal with the aging demographic that is losing economic footing, but still is a large portion of our region's viability? And then the second question may or may not be related, but it is what will be done to address the generational gap? Do we skip over those caught in the sweeping changes? And they talk about the adaptability of late baby boomers. So I guess some love needs to be shown in these questions to our aging senior populations. Any thoughts from any of you on that?
So maybe two comments. And Randy, I think it's broader than the senior population. I actually think it's Gen X as well. I think we do have to prepare our community broadly to participate in the economic opportunity and also to prepare for changes that are coming down. We talk about what we could have, should have done better to prepare not just our community, but let's say broadly the country for the impact of globalization and what that meant in terms of the loss of many types of good middle class jobs throughout our community and many other communities because of the replacement of labor with technology. That's coming again now into the white collar areas, whether it's around financial services, healthcare administration, office administration. We see technology on the horizon that will be displacing what we today consider to be middle class, good paying, good benefit jobs. We need to prepare, our older generations, I guess, of which I'm a part too now, Generation X and the seniors, for that change. Otherwise, we're going to have another significant dislocation with significant spillover effect on our communities. So that's something that we certainly are advocating for, but it's hard to prepare someone for something that still feels a little bit distant, but within the next 5 to probably 10 years will become very real for our community broadly, especially with its dependence on healthcare services and financial services and kind of general management organizations for such a large portion of our employment.
Excellent. Anything Bradford or India would like to add to that?
As a millennial in leadership, I feel it's my moral obligation to at least try to respond to the question. I guess at some level I might challenge a part of the premise that that the other generations have borne the brunt of it. I would say that 9/11, student loan debt crisis, the housing bubble, and COVID have been borne by all of us, and maybe specifically. I will say that I think there is a cross-section of public policy items that need to be addressed for all of us, right? And that's tax abatement, right? We're currently studying the city's tax abatement policy, has broad implications for older homeowners throughout the city of Cleveland, as well as potentially first-time home buyers. So these are policy pieces that affect us all. Basic city services. Basic city services are something that we have to get right for older and aging adults, as well as new families, right? And so if we can focus on getting the basics right, we can set the conditions for success and a thriving local economy. So folks like Beju and the business community and India and the foundation community can fill in those gaps and help address the things that maybe are outside of just government.
Thank you. Anything else about that question you'd like to add, any of you? Okay, I'll answer this next question real quick. The first, it's a two-part question. Who will be the backbone organization? Who's going to lead this to ensure that the correct decisions are made? I would say that is to be determined. Obviously, there are resources needed and a buy-in from various sectors on who is the right organization. But I think that's part of what we would hope, that if we could agree that the collective impact strategy is a good one for Cleveland, and that the backbone organization is a major part of that strategy, then perhaps we could figure that out in the not so distant future. The second part is who owns this urban equity agenda. I would say that PolicyBridge owns the authorship of the report, but we believe that the work is something that everyone in the region should own. It's because we all have a role to play. We all have gifts and talents and resources and should view this as all of our collective work. There's a question about Cleveland. Someone referred Robert Putnam's Better Together and talked about Cleveland having a great deal of social capital, but not the bridging capital. Just stating that we need to expand capacity. I think that's more of a comment. I see some heads nodding with our guests, and perhaps that's the beauty of, again, getting resident voice in the room and as a part of the decision-making process. There's another few questions that I do want to ensure that I put out there for the panelists, because someone is asking, what commitments can each of you make from where you sit to publicly and visibly join this dialogue so that we are truly working collectively? I would say in your defense that the fact that you are here, you had lots of competing interests, but you made it your business to be here, and that, as I've stated, you've walked the walk or the talk, in fact, in terms of leading, being a leader with the Fund for Economic Future, being a leader with the various initiatives that both Beju and India have been involved in. But I certainly would want you to speak for yourself. What commitments can each of you make in this regard? And we'll start with India.
I think, as a foundation, we work with the community. We are part of the community. And as we look at our strategic direction, we are looking to align with the mayor's administration, as well as working with GCP and others. That's part of our role. We're not just a grant maker, we're a convener, we're a strategic partner and a critical friend. So it is important that we work with all entities. But again, I think we have some convening power as well to pull together with others to see this through, if that's the direction people want to go.
Thank you. Beju or Bradford?
I would just echo that, there's a lot in this agenda that intersects with priorities that we've set for the region and for ourselves to be a partner in bringing to full realization. So we are certainly committed to participating with the table of other partners to see how we can move this entire agenda forward. And we'll contribute as the business committee in the areas where we have some knowledge and resource.
Thank you, Beju. Bradford?
I would say two things. When I started in this role some 50 days ago, a colleague sent me a magnet for my office, and it said, as you step into a new leadership role, don't be afraid to dream. And as soft and fuzzy as that might sound, I think it's an imperative. It's an absolute imperative that we commit to audacious goals and audacious dreams, and we try to get to a place of yes, because it's very easy to get to no. The challenges that our city face is tremendous. The upside, the potential, the optimism, it's a beautiful thing, but the challenges are immense and awesome. And so just staying in a place of yes is really important. And so I think first and foremost, what we can say is for the next 4 years, we're committed to saying yes and to dreaming to solve these problems. And then two, I think it's a commitment to honesty and communication. India referenced the media, and so we have to be a good partner in communicating our priorities and our changing priorities and what we're doing. We need to tell our story so that others can reflect on whether or not we're doing a good job or not. We need a constant feedback loop. And so one of the things that we can certainly commit to in the city of Cleveland is always being an honest broker and communicating with y'all.
Excellent responses. These next few questions, I think I'm going to invite the panelists to correct me if I'm wrong or weigh in if you want to say something about it, but they sort of feel like, to me, questions that would need to be answered by a backbone organization or maybe it illuminates the importance of having a backbone organization to wrestle with these types of questions. So the one question is, are there other urban cities that we can learn from to gain expertise on an urban agenda? The other is, how does Northeast Ohio create a collective impact model where there are sectors not aligned in their values and ideologies and priorities? So again, that gets back to the need for ongoing discussion and dialogue and challenging each other and that kind of a thing. And then the third question is there a sector threshold for this collective impact model to work with? In other words, how many organizations and institutions are needed to be a part of a successful collective impact? All good questions. I don't know if any of you have answers to those. My thought is that those are great questions that perhaps a backbone organization would need to wrestle with, because they require and I think deserve thought and input from various constituencies. But please, any reactions from any of you on those points, related questions? Okay, we agree those could be directed to the backbone, but that does highlight the importance of the backbone. This is next question says, analyzing health and economic indicators, how often should institutions have checkpoints to identify what programs and what decisions need attention? I guess would be the last part of that. Any thoughts on that? It sort of gets back to the data and metrics, but go ahead, Baiju.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to jump in on that. I think this is really important because for me, at least on an annual basis, if not more frequently, it's critical that we take stock of our progress and see if we are on trajectory. But as important to that annual taking stock is, before the year starts, setting a target of where we should be. Too often I see in these types of efforts that we measure on an annual basis, but we've never publicly stated where we aspired to be a year from now. It's a hard thing to sign up for metrics, especially metrics when there are a broad set of things that one cannot control in not only our local environment, but as we know from news of the day, global issues that occur that can really upset sort of everyone's trajectory. But it's really important to have an aspiration and then take stock at every year to see how are we doing, and if we're not on trajectory, have the hard conversation as a community about what did we miss and what needs to change so that we get on trajectory, and it's not something that 5 years from now or 10 years from now we look back and say we're still exactly where we were and we haven't really made progress against the ambitions that we set forward on.
Outstanding.
And just to that point, Baiju, we have to be willing to take some risks too. We have to try things differently and be willing to accept failure, but also be flexible and nimble to make the shifts and changes quickly enough to keep moving. Too often we get stuck if something doesn't work, we just, give up, and you can't give up. And again, we can't keep the status quo. The status quo has not worked. I don't know what the answers are, but I know we can do better and we can do differently.
I think that's so well said, India. Yeah, there was a question about, or Randy, you mentioned, are there other places we can learn from? We're certainly open to learning, and we should be open to learning from everywhere, whether it's in this country or other places in the world that have tackled these issues. But we also have to become creative, because I'm not aware of a city that has really resolved these issues broadly for their residents and for their communities. So taking risk, thinking innovatively, as India said, I think not being afraid to fail, but taking lessons from each of those. That's what we do in entrepreneurship. That's what we do, throughout the tech and biotech sectors. We embrace that type of risk, and we need to have that same type of risk-taking mindset as it relates to these civic challenges.
Amen. Anything, Bradford, you want to add? Okay. We are winding down, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, the panelists, as well as those in the audience. There is a question, India, that says, what would it look like for funders like the Cleveland Foundation to open grant making to businesses with social missions and impacts that are focused on minorities and the community? I'll take liberty as a board member of the Cleveland Foundation to say there is something called the Black Futures Fund, which is giving mightily and generously to Black nonprofits in terms of Black businesses. I don't know if there's anything brewing or that you're doing right now that is worth a quick mention, India.
Well, I think, first of all, we can only fund 501c3 nonprofit organizations. However, we do fund a lot of organizations that work in that, ECDI, the Urban League, Hispanic Business Center. We provide resources to Fund for Economic Future, organizations that are doing this work on the ground. We provide those resources through those nonprofits.
Thank you so much. Well said. We unfortunately, for those of you in the audience, we couldn't get to all of your questions. There's a couple here that would require the panelists to go back into response mode, but we certainly will make sure that the panelists get your questions and continue to be mindful of what we're hearing from the community as we go about our daily work. I do want to give one plug to the person who simply stated we must deal with the trauma of systemic racism, and how do we do that? And I think that's a fair question and something that we should all be thinking about in our travels. Before I turn this back over to our illustrious Dean Anglin to close us out, I did want to just highlight 3 quotes from the 3 panelists that stood out for me that I certainly will use as my personal marching orders. Bradford talked about ask and answer. Ask the tough questions, and be prepared to engage in dialogue, and the fact that it's sometimes going to be uncomfortable. And that's the only way you really get to meaningful change. It's not going to be a feel-good thing all the time, but we have to ask the questions and challenge ourselves to think differently. India talked about, I loved it. How do we get past the past? We got to do that, ladies and gentlemen. It's a new day in Cleveland. We have new leadership. We have new opportunity. And only until we decide that we're going to push those challenges behind and move forward will we get to where we want to go. So thank you for that. And I love Beju's comment about setting a target of where we should be. We can very easily talk about what's wrong and what would be nice, but we really get to where we want to go in terms of holding ourselves accountable and moving our city forward when we set firm targets and we imagine what the future of Cleveland could and should look like, and drive towards achieving that particular objective. So thank you all again for your time, for your great questions. Thank you, panelists, for your brilliant input. Again, for your time. I know you're very busy. Looking forward to having ongoing conversations about the urban agenda with you and many others, including those of you in the audience. And with that, I would turn things back over for close out to Dean Anglin.
Thank you, Randy. And the operative word here is close. First of all, I want to thank the panel for a wonderful set of comments and wonderful insight. I want to thank PolicyBridge for allowing us to partner with you on this road of exploration. This is not a close. This is an opening. This is an opportunity for this community to really think about what it would take to make a measurable difference in the lives of those who really are at the margins of society. So let's give ourselves some leave. I heard a couple of things that will help us think about the next conversation. One is rethinking community engagement. What does that really mean to have community voice? What does it mean to have a substantive conversation about community impact, collective impact? What is equity? Where and when do we enter this conversation and a set of wicked problems? And one of the most interesting questions I heard today was, how do you build a collective impact process when the trends are so fast moving and so challenging? These are the questions that we will, PolicyLink and Levin will go back and figure out how to make a conversation go forward. And I wanted to thank you all again for coming today. It's been very interesting, and stay tuned for the next forum.